Body blow. Knock him out.
Boxing games have been around since the early days of the arcade, with Sega's Heavyweight Champ. There really wasn't a whole lot of strategy involved in these early titles, aside from punch punch, punch punch. It wasn't until Nintendo unveiled its dual-screen masterpiece Punch-Out! That we got not only excellent advanced graphics and playability, but also the presentation and spectacle that comes along with a pro boxing event. What is the real reason that two monitors were used in the arcade version? So put in your mouthpiece and wait for the bell, because this is the history of Punch-Out! The year is 1983, and Laserdisc games are all the rage amongst the arcade community. Nintendo did not want to take on the heavy maintenance burden associated with Laserdisc technology, but realized that it needed to deliver the impressive visuals to compete with the emerging products. They started to investigate scaling and rotation on sprites, and found they were able to do it, but only with one sprite at a time. Another problem was a stock issue. After sales of the arcade mega-hit Donkey Kong started to slow, it realized it was left with a surplus of monitors. After their attempt at creating a side-by-side racing game failed, inspiration struck. Since the boxer only ever has one opponent, this was perfect for the developing hardware. The second screen will be used for all of the pageantry, displays, banners, etc. The uniqueness of the game can be attributed to two key staff members, game designer Genyo Takada and artist Shigeru Miyamoto. Mr. Takada thought the game should be tailored towards the Western market since boxing was centered in America, and also the arcade scene was huge there. His other major contribution was a realistic control scheme using actual boxing gloves, similar to what Sega did in the arcade title Heavyweight Champ. Funny enough, Mr. Miyamoto stepped in and said that a standard joystick would work better than motion controls. Ultimately, Mr. Miyamoto would go on to produce the Nintendo Wii. The game ended up shipping with 3 fire buttons and 1 joystick. The original designs for the wacky cast of characters goes to Mr. Miyamoto. He had to fill in giant pixel images on giant pieces of graph paper and then submit them to the animation department. If you look closely, you can spot Mario and Donkey Kong in the crowd. Punch-Out! Was released in December 1983. You take on the role of an unnamed boxer as he attempts to win the World Heavyweight title. The game consists of one 3-minute round in which you have to knock out your opponent. You have to carefully time dodges by going left and right with the joystick, all the while watching for their eyes to flash, then you can unleash your inner fury on them for a few seconds. Landing a series of successful blows will fill up the KO meter. Once the meter is full, smack the KO button and you can unleash either an uppercut or a body blow. If you climb the ranks to defeat the 5 other challengers, you will face Mr. Sandman in the title fight. If you defeat him, you raise up the belt over your head and turn around and we finally get a good look at you. After this, the game loops only with you as champion. The graphics are really well done with large detailed scaling sprites, which was a pretty big deal back in 1983. The reason that your boxer is in wireframe form is because your viewpoint would be diminished if he was solid. The sound effects and music are appropriate for a boxing game. There are also a lot of voices in the game as each boxer is announced, and there are also words of motivation by your trainer. Just take a listen. Punch-Out! Was an early pioneer in the use of synthesized speech in video games. To help promote the game, Nintendo went to the 1984 Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas and hired the world heavyweight boxing champ Larry Holmes to help promote the game. Later that year, Super Punch-Out! Was released into the arcades. This was essentially the same game, only with an updated cast of challengers. One big difference is the addition of a duck maneuver, which if you pull back on the joystick, you will attempt to avoid your opponent's punch. Where the first game featured a pretty much straightforward list of standard boxers that you had to fight, Super Punch-Out! Introduced the concept of wacky and wild challengers. For example, Canadian Bear Hugger is a lumberjack from Canada, complete with a big, thick, bushy beard and overalls. Dragon Chan is a martial artist from Hong Kong who was based on Bruce Lee and has a flying kick for a special move. The more the series continued, the wackier the boxers became. With Nintendo leaving the arcade scene behind and transitioning to the home market, the decision was made to introduce Punch-Out for homes everywhere. From the get-go, it was obvious they couldn't do a straight arcade conversion due to the less powerful NES hardware. Rather than try to draw two large sprites on screen, they opted to only draw the challenger large and make your character small. He felt it was more satisfying to see a little guy knock out a big guy, and I think he was right. Also, this is where he got the name Little Mac. A number of changes were added to the game to give it more depth. Now the game was split into 3 rounds instead of 1. The KO bar was removed, with uppercuts being earned by blocking your opponent's punches and countering. Swinging wildly was discouraged, as each missed or blocked punch will deplete hearts. If the heart meter goes down to 0, Little Mac became tired and unable to punch. He would then have to dodge blows for a brief period. Since the game was expanded upon for the home market, a number of new boxers were created. There were a few that made it over from Super Punch-Out, including Super Macho Man, Great Tiger, and Vodka Drunkinski, who was renamed Soda Popinski. You were also given a trainer in between rounds by the name of Doc Lewis. After witnessing the events of the first 2 Punch-Out games, Mario decided to get his referee license and became part of the show. Speaking of Doc Lewis, after retiring from the pro boxing business, he decided to change gears and become a top-notch paper seller at Dunder Mifflin. The last big addition to the game was the acquisition of Mike Tyson. This came about due to Nintendo of America president Minoru Arakawa being impressed with the young undefeated world heavyweight champ and thought this would be the perfect license. In my opinion, Mike Tyson was one of the hardest bosses ever in any video game. Out of the hundreds of tries, I only ever beat Mike Tyson once, and it was a joyous occasion. The game was a monster hit on the NES, and also gave us another classic NES video game commercial.
Power, now you are playing with power. Punch-Out by Nintendo. 11 world-class contenders. Take them down with your controller, beat them all, and you've got a shot at Tyson's title. Power! But for that, you've got to beat Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
Due to Mike Tyson's legal troubles, Nintendo decided they no longer wanted to be associated with him, so in 1990, they released a revised version simply titled Punch-Out. This featured a new champion in Mike Tyson's place named Mr. Dream, but he was simply Mike Tyson with a redrawn head. Next up for the Punch-Out franchise was Super Punch-Out for the Super Nintendo system. Thanks to the more powerful Super Nintendo hardware, Little Mac essentially became medium-sized Mac with a larger sprite being used. The hearts and stars from the NES version were gone, but the KO meter is back. The graphics and animation are superb in this with bright, vibrant colors. This is absolutely one of my favorite games in the series, with the biggest roster of challengers at a grand total of 16. Little Mac, or medium-sized Mac, is given 3 lives for each circuit, and after completing each circuit, the game is saved. The wacky cast of challengers are even wackier. You've got Gabby J, EA, a waiter from Paris, France, who decided to take up boxing. Apparently, he is the spiritual successor to Glass Joe. There is also the Mad Clown, a traveling circus clown who decided to put the gloves on and take up boxing. There is also Narcissus Prince, a vain British Ivy Leaguer. Another Super Nintendo game, another Super Nintendo commercial. Check it out.
Okay, kid, get out there and remember, you're a tiger, kid. A tiger! That's the champ. Now he's running. How you feeling, kid? Good, good. That's using your head. Strategy. You're a genius, kid, a real professor. kid. A bum. Don't worry, kid. It'll heal.
New Super Punch-Out, only for Super NES. Get smart, or get knocked stupid.
Only 12 guys to go. You're the king, I tell you. The king!
Little Mac would lay dormant for the next 25 years until Punch-Out was released for the Nintendo Wii. The gameplay from the classic NES version returns, and it plays incredible. While the gameplay is from the NES, the graphics are next level. Using cel-shaded graphics, it looks like a living and breathing cartoon. The roster of 16 only includes 3 new fighters, one of which is Donkey Kong. A cool new feature is the implementation of a 2-player mode. The game can be played with a standard remote by turning it sideways so it feels like an NES controller. Or the motion controls can be used, which honestly plays really good. Let me just take a minute to talk about Elite Software's Frank Bruno's Boxing. As I mentioned a few times in the past, copyright laws are a bit lax over in Europe, so when a software company rips off an arcade game, apparently it's no big deal. The game is essentially the arcade version of Super Punch-Out and was released for various 8-bit computers. Even the first 3 boxers were ripped straight from the arcade game. I had this game as a kid and was always curious how they were able to get away with it. It's a pretty big feat considering how large the sprites are on the limited 8-bit hardware. It actually plays really good. Now, even though there hasn't been a new game since 2009, Nintendo still has plenty of love for Little Mac. Released as fighter number 49 in the Super Smash Bros. Game, Little Mac makes a welcome addition to the franchise. There were a couple of pieces of merchandise released over the years that I thought were really cool. The first one is in the Game & Watch collection by Nintendo. Released strictly as boxing in Japan, it was later renamed to Punch-Out when released here in America. In 1988, Hasbro released the Nintendo Trophy Figures line. Part of that lineup featured a few figures based on Punch-Out. To be honest, these are more statues with action poses than anything else, but it's still cool to see Little Mac and the gang in all their plastic glory. The Punch-Out franchise has been a big seller for Nintendo, especially here in the States. For the last 10 years, it's remained dormant, but I'm sure plans are afoot somehow, somewhere to revive the series. The NES and Super NES versions were the most popular, but if you have a chance to check out the original arcade version, be sure and give it a shot. It's a great trip down memory lane. If you like this video, please consider showing me some love on Patreon. It's just me, myself, and I that does all the work on these videos. So anything you can contribute, I sure would appreciate. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.